Hello, we're so pleased to welcome you to today's Climate Week New York City panel, Moving America's Freight Industry Towards Net Zero, how the transport industry is saving the planet by pooling more freight. Hello, my name is Tim Mohin. I'm Chief Sustainability Officer at Persefoni, a leading carbon management and accounting platform. As you probably know, this year's Climate Week theme is Getting It Done. Restarting the economy after a pandemic and recession has not been easy, but our panelists are optimistic. They are stakeholders in the global supply chain ecosystem committed to delivering against decarbonization goals. From establishing a robust digital infrastructure, carrier and supplier collaboration, data sharing, and new investments for decarbonization. Taken together, these innovations have the potential to reinvent the global supply chain for our low carbon future. Our panelists today include Oren Zaslansky, the founder and CEO of Flock Freight. Flock is creating a smarter, more sustainable supply chain with its patented AI, which finds and fills trucks' empty spaces so shippers can save money, carriers can earn more, and businesses can move goods with more reliability and fewer emissions. Oren is joined by Allison Cullin, a senior vice president at the DC-based Foundry Stone Partners, where she is a transportation technology policy expert working on supply chain and logistics policy. David Glick, the chief technology officer at Flexe, which brings together a demand warehousing and flexible e-commerce fulfillment, distribution, and transportation system. And Christine Weydig, the newly appointed executive director for the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility, a global coalition of industry, government, and academic leaders shaping policy for more equitable and sustainable solutions that leverage technology to improve the movement of people and goods around the world. Previously, she served as director of the Office of Sustainability at the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. The pandemic, global conflicts, and extreme weather events continue to put a spotlight on the flaws that exist in our global supply chain, especially in freight, which produces more than 7% of global greenhouse gas emissions. As we recover from the pandemic, it's clear that we need to do more. An investment in green technologies and AI is a critical solution. Oren, how are companies using tech to solve these logistical challenges? And what are the impacts on climate change?
Yeah, thank you, and really excited to be here today. I think the most important thing that a firm can consider is doing something, engaging, making a conscious decision to say that it is table stakes to provide a great service and high quality for our customers. At the same time, we have to do it in a much more sustainable way. I think something that we're deeply focused on is the empty space that exists in the U.S. fleet, so to speak. If you imagine a $500 billion industry of the big trucks that we see on the highways, up to half of those trucks are only about half full. It's an enormous point of waste, both from the standpoint of the shipper, the manufacturer out there is paying for an entire truck, and there's a lot of economic waste. And certainly in a time of massive inflation in this country, if we could find an opportunity to reduce costs, I think that the consumers will greatly benefit from that. In addition, the carrier community, the truck driving community, is constantly struggling to make a fair wage. So providing an opportunity for that community, which I would argue, and I think that the world rediscovered this during the pandemic, is utterly essential for all of us. We enjoy eating and seeing food on the grocery store shelves. That comes from the hard work of the U.S. men and women truck driving fleet. And then, of course, from a sustainability perspective, you're going to burn the same amount of diesel fuel for every mile you run down the road, whether that truck is full or only half full. We believe that finding that empty space and filling that empty space is going to create value for all the stakeholders, whether it's, again, the manufacturer having an opportunity to access that supplier surplus, that surplus inventory that's sitting there empty, for the carrier, the trucking company to have an opportunity to make more money, quite frankly, and then ultimately to reduce greenhouse gas.
Great, thanks, Oren. Allison, I want to get your perspective from the policy side. The SEC earlier this year published a 500-page proposed rule that's going to affect almost every listed company in the country, and they're going to have to disclose their greenhouse gas emissions as part of their financial statements, which is new and kind of may have some implications for the freight industry. In addition, just a couple of weeks ago, the president signed into law a new Inflation Reduction Act, and that Inflation Reduction Act will have all sorts of different grants and loans and other policies to stimulate clean tech across the economy. Can you comment on the impact of some of these new policies and the challenges and opportunities for the freight industry?
Absolutely. The SEC rule is a really interesting transition in policymaking. I think we're seeing policymakers start to look at operations as a key element in reducing emissions and increasing sustainability in the transportation sector. So far, people have been really focused on pure infrastructure, looking at charging, clean manufacturing, and some of the other incentive programs that can really drive efficiencies in that infrastructure. But the SEC ruling is different because it really focuses on operations and reducing the total emissions from a transportation trip. So I think policymakers are starting to see that there's steps beyond the traditional infrastructure that they're thinking about, and what that looks like. It will certainly be a challenge to get the SEC rule across the finish line, but I think we're going to increasingly see policymakers looking to these additional opportunities to, as Oren said, reduce the amount of air that we're shipping. So we're really increasing the sustainability of a total movement when we're looking at ton miles and the emissions associated with it. And so it's going to be a really fascinating transition as we move forward, as we start to see digitalization and additional technology used to drive those efficiencies beyond simply electrification, which is an important and critical step, but it's simply not enough.
That's fantastic. So we're seeing the confluence of policy and technology coming together for a cleaner supply chain. David, you've had a front row seat to some of the rise in e-commerce. I know you worked for quite a while at Amazon, and you've seen the massive changes that e-commerce has spurred in warehousing and fulfillment. Oren made the point that AI can find and fill empty spaces and put freight on the most efficient routes. So shippers save more, carriers earn more, goods stay on time and damage-free, all while reducing emissions. Tell us a little bit about on-demand warehousing and how this fits in a sustainable supply chain.
Sure. Traditionally, when you set up a warehouse, you have big buildings, maybe 500,000 square feet, and long-term contracts. And at Amazon, we used to say batches are bad. This is a very batchy process in time and space. And so what we found is, just like Oren's trying to fill trucks fuller, we want to fill warehouses fuller by accessing those corners of the warehouse. So you might not need 100,000 square feet or 500,000 square feet of space. You might just need 20,000 square feet. And so Flex can help you find that. So what that means is pouring less concrete. But even more important than that, we say from a cost standpoint, all the cost is in the arcs, in the trucks that are moving goods around. But putting the nodes in the right place will reduce the cost in the arcs, and the same is true for emissions. If we put the inventory in the right place, close to customers, that reduces the amount of time it's on the road and reduces the diesel you're burning. And so we use AI not necessarily in our daily putting packages on the truck, but figuring out where we should put warehouses, and then what we should put in each of the warehouses so it's closer to the customers, reducing both cost and emissions.
That's super interesting. I'm kind of thinking of little robots figuring out what my next Amazon order is and making sure that it's in the closest place to my house. So I don't know if that's actually true, but that's what's in my mind. So
we always tried to put it near you.
Appreciate that. Christine, I'd like to ask you about your new role at the coalition and a report that your coalition just released called Solving the Global Supply Chain Crisis with Data Sharing. One of the findings of this report is that modernizing the freight industry is increasing, by increasing digitization, could actually reduce carbon emissions by 22%, I'd love you just to kind of walk through the report and its findings for us.
So building on some of the really impressive work that Flock is doing as it relates to removing some of the inefficiencies in the system, and same with Flex, what our report is doing, and really what the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility does, is really take a sort of a system-wide approach to some of these challenges and what some of the potential solutions are. So we're really in the report looking at the entire supply chain. So from the ocean going vessels all the way to delivery at the doorstep. And so that figure of a 22% by 2050 reduction in greenhouse gas emissions by adopting an open protocol for data sharing and really requiring the sharing of data across that entire supply chain is looking at sort of the big picture and all of the potential efficiencies that can be gained really through digitalization of a form of transportation that hasn't seen modernization for over 100 years. So as a general matter, and I came from the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey that operated airports, marine ports, bridges and tunnels, transportation hubs, big real estate, rail. Having that system-wide view at the potential for something like digitalization within the transportation sector is really important to try to bring some of the innovations that companies like Flex and Flock are bringing to market, but really trying to nudge the entire transportation sector in that direction. And so, with the pandemic and geopolitical events like the war in Ukraine, I think pretty much all of us really for the first time felt this global supply chain fragility that really is endemic in the system. And so by adopting some of these digital standards that other sectors of the economy have already benefited from, we can really improve the resilience of that supply chain so that we can better withstand some of these disruptions, and at the same time realize these really important environmental benefits that not only help to mitigate climate change, but also improve local air quality in our communities. Because if you have idling vessels and idling trucks and all of these other inefficiencies, that also equals air pollutants. And so many of these are communities that are already vulnerable to the effects of climate change and already are bearing a disproportionate impact of public health impacts of air pollutants. And what's really interesting about this digitalization focus of our paper is we all know intuitively, and Allison made this point, that some of the actual vessels and equipment and medium and heavy duty on-road transportation really need to decarbonize at the fuel level, at the actual equipment and vehicle level, whether it's going electric, or in the case of vessels, it could be hydrogen or ammonia or biofuels. All of that is happening, but it will take time before a lot of that next generation of vehicles comes to market. In the meantime, digitalization is really low-hanging fruit. It's something that could be implemented in the near term, and you're already seeing pockets of the supply chain starting to adopt it, but it really is about leveraging that and really bringing it across that supply chain. So, I really encourage everyone to go find our paper. It's on our homepage, on our website, and, really dive into the detail.
Thank you so much, Christine. And the website is reimaginedmobility.org. It's a fantastic report. I recommend everybody go take a look at it. I just want to open it up to all the panelists, because I was sitting here reflecting on the conversation we're having, and I'm thinking about just coming through this once in a lifetime event of the pandemic, when at first we couldn't get toilet paper, and then we couldn't get bicycles, and you name it, the supply chain couldn't get it to us. And it really kind of exposed some of the weaknesses, if you will, in our globalized economy. And what I'm hearing from the panelists, and I want to test this idea and have you respond to it, is that it's kind of opened up an opportunity to add some intelligence into how we deliver goods. And that adding of intelligence is actually going to make the system more efficient and therefore better for the environment. Is that a correct statement? And how would you see that actually manifesting in the future?
Yeah, I can jump in. I couldn't agree more. It's not so much that there's a dearth or an absence of data. It just isn't being shared. And it's to all of our mutual detriment, unfortunately. From Flock's point of view, if you want to, we call it shared truckload. If you want to be able to take multiple customers' freight to fill up that truck so that there's no empty space, access a lower cost, a lower friction alternative, and at the same time reduce greenhouse gas, we need to know where's the empty space. There are things like electronic log devices, ELDs, which through Department of Transportation mandate were rolled out, I think in 2018, 2019, that can give us telemetry, can give us visibility. Where's the truck? For the first time ever. It's not actually a technological problem. There are a lot of service providers that can furnish us with that data so that we can see where the truck is, but there's a massive, massive change behavior opportunity here. Carriers are very reticent to share that data. And on the one hand, I understand it. They everything from privacy concerns to trying to maximize their own business needs or competitive advantage. And at the same time, I try to focus on the economic opportunity. I often think that the way to unlock sustainability is to reduce friction and provide additional income opportunities for the constituents. If we can show people how they can make more money and do so with less friction, then I think we can back into some significant sustainability improvements across the supply chain. But we have to be able to access data from one another, whether it's identified or de-identified, whether we're connecting directly or whether we're going through intermediaries. In fact, my opinion would be that probably all of the above are going to be necessary. This is a huge problem, and it's a huge industry. The supply chain is about $7 trillion globally on an annualized basis. It's as big as anything out there. Fundamentally, everything is made in one place and consumed someplace else. So it was shipped in some way, shape, or form between those 2 points. There's a lot of data that's just completely fragmented, and unfortunately, and I would want to set expectations that people have to be really sincere about wanting to solve this problem. Pointing the finger simply at, well, we need a new technology or a new capability, it's not quite so simple. We have to change our behaviors and our attitudes around sustainability. Number one, of course, first and foremost, we have to acknowledge there's a real problem. That's really where it starts. And then secondly, make a commitment to solving it. But we really, really believe the best way to do that is by creating aligned economic incentives and making it easy for people to do the right thing. People are always going to do the right thing when you make it easy. Sometimes it gets a little squeamish when it's hard to do that.
I think there's a lot of really fascinating stuff going on with data, but it's also just that communications that Oren is talking about here. When I worked on Capitol Hill for many years and we were writing policy for motor carrier transportation and freight transportation, there was an expectation that freight transportation was digital and smart, and it was incorrect. I mean, realistically, a lot of transportation is still arranged by fax and phone calls and really low tech measures. And where you bring technology in and where you bring technology to the table, you can really make a big difference in terms of efficiency and operations and also sustainability. And so I think it really comes down to what gets measured gets done. And so where we can kind of be measuring and really looking at technology as an additive to this industry, we've got a lot of opportunity, both on the emissions and the efficiency side.
At Amazon, we said, a complete process has 3 parts: automation, adoption, and audit. And what we've done, my team's done and Oren's team has done, is like do the automation part. But what I always found at Amazon is that the adoption is much harder than the automation, because people have roadmaps, and even if you give them a much better product that will make their lives easier, they don't get it. And you'll have some that are early adopters who said, oh, this makes me better. And then, as Allison said, what gets measured gets managed. We would put metrics around it and push people to adopt, and then then there was the stick, and that was phase 3. Anytime we had to drive the whole company to adopt a new process or a new technology, we'd have a project manager who'd go and have to make one by one people move. And I think if you think about vertically integrated supply chains, Amazon has the data from the factory at China to your doorstep. And so they've done a very good job of filling trucks fuller and putting inventory close to the customer and building warehouses where they need it, all that using data. That is a much easier job for them because they have all the data. And you've seen Amazon Logistics scale from nothing to the biggest package carrier in the world because they could meter out the supply or the demand as they built supply. And so, how do you scale that from one company reporting to one CEO to the whole world? And I think that's a big challenge, but we need to make sure that it's not just building better products, it's having the adoption curve, which is, the president signing executive orders and the SEC writing rules and all of those things, which are part of the stick after people get access to the carrot.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. It really is about developing the carrots and the sticks on the policy side so that we're really seeing those innovations and changes across the network, impacting each of the players here.
I think it's just phenomenal. We're actually seeing a situation where there's money to be made. There's actual, additional waste in the system that we can drop out. We can create additional economic benefit while improving environmental characteristics. It sounds like a win-win-win. You've succinctly laid out some of the barriers. When one company does it, Amazon, who's also sort of a very leading digitization company, they can do it well. But as we heard from Oren, that there's a lot of different companies involved, a lot of different countries involved, a lot of different sort of supply chains and products. How do we do this? How do we bring a global supply chain together so that we can be more efficient, more effective, and better for the environment?
One of the main recommendations in Remo's paper, if I could, really is that there's an important role for government here, not only in accelerating the development of the data standards, but then really via carrots and sticks requiring not only that across the supply chain the standards get adopted, but requiring the data sharing. And one thing that's important to point out is while there is money to be made and savings to be gained by improving this efficiency, especially in the US where there's a landlord tenant relationship at most of the ports, it's important to keep in mind that that port operation is subsidized. And so especially when we're seeing a lot of inflation and again, something that intuitively many people might think is already happening in terms of a modern freight system, it's not there. And so to start reducing some of that government support, I think government also needs to take the lead on requiring this data sharing.
Yeah, I would add, I think that the government does have an opportunity to create a forcing function. The entire transportation industry was regulated up until the 80s, and I think deregulation was a super healthy thing that created a ton of competition and deflated a lot of the costs and ultimately improved quality. But I think we can just simply point to the ELD mandate I mentioned just a bit ago, that it was creating a forcing function to like an outcome, but not necessarily legislating how it get done. And so I think that the new move now with the SEC to require publicly listed companies to share their carbon emissions is going to be one of those forcing functions. We have a lot of large enterprise customers, Fortune 500 publicly traded, that they want to do the right thing, and sometimes it's nice to be let off that hook and for it to be made a little bit easier by creating more of an even playing field, by creating a tide that says you don't have to actually lead on this, but you do have to participate. And in doing so, the change behavior begins to occur. We talk to many, the largest shippers in the world who often hear about the opportunity. I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling to, instead of procuring an entire truck, to only ship a half a truck. That is the absolute norm. The Fortune 500, the largest, most sophisticated shippers in the world. We've mentioned Amazon a number of times. I could tell you firsthand, Amazon will pay for a full truck and only fill it halfway. And it's not their fault. That's the system. Amazon's incredibly smart, incredibly sophisticated. That is the way that people like me on the supplier side who provide these services, whether it's as an intermediary, a technology company, or an actual carrier, the trucks, what they often do is they can simply do no better than to say, I'll give you the whole truck. By creating an environment where now this information is going to be out there for ultimately consumers, to make their buying decisions. And it's always a competitive landscape. They may choose brand A, they may choose brand B based on something like how sustainable and how efficient that organization is. They're going to have to change the way they procure. They're going to have to change the way they capture data, the way that they share data. One of the biggest roadblocks we run into is not whether or not people think this is a great idea, whether or not it can save them money, whether or not it's more sustainable. It's simply, gee, we don't have software in place in order to procure and only pay for as much space as we use, which is such a tragedy. That the limitation is that not that they want this or even need this, but rather we don't have the systems in place to procure based on the amount of space we use. We're forced into buying the whole thing or buying just a small parcel or package, Amazon Logistics, FedEx, UPS. There are hundreds of billions of dollars being spent on trillions of dollars worth of goods. I think a lot of times, the typical kind of American consumer doesn't understand the sheer size of US GDP. And that when we talk about the supply chain, we're effectively talking about GDP in motion. Every dollar spent in the US supply chain is just some percentage of US GDP. And of course, it's the largest in the world. The need for that forcing function to at least create visibility and transparency over what's going on, and then allow people to make those choices. I think the vast majority of people will make the right choice and say, I want a more sustainable solution. There are more sustainable solutions. We need to work together on changing behavior to be able to share that data so that these outcomes are very quickly much more sustainable. The good news is we're at a time and place with our technology and cloud compute and our ability to bring these complex solutions to market. We can do this in months and years. This is not decades out. We can do this right away.
So driving change from the demand side with transparency, I think that's a clear solution. I'd like to maybe throw out another one and see how the panelists react. What role in making our global freight supply chain more efficient does collaboration really play between all the major players?
We have to put processes or technology in place around this because, we think people, we know people are well-intentioned. We think they're doing the right thing, but like everybody they're up to their ears in their roadmap and their, profitability and ABC, all the things. And so building mechanisms, which could be metrics, could be technology, which could be regulation, all of those are pieces that we have to put in place. And if you think about like the success stories of regulation in the US, like seatbelts.
Yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities within the Inflation Reduction Act and a number of other different pieces of legislation where there's billions of dollars that's being invested in this infrastructure. There's billions of dollars that's being invested in the supply chain and a unique focus at the moment on addressing supply chain issues. And so how can we work with US government and international government organizations to develop new carrots and sticks to get this process moving? Is it looking at metrics and reporting, or is it really looking at developing new technologies and new data sharing standards that give us that step forward and really get us to a point where we're a little closer to this ideal state where we've got data and really real transparency in the freight network? There's a ton of opportunity, and we just need stakeholders to get together to kind of drive the agenda so that we've got real investment in this and real thought process leading to new changes that kind of transform transportation.
I think that government really needs to use its authority to convene the stakeholders because, there are other priorities that many of these stakeholders have. And having this be voluntary, I think we even saw it in the greenhouse gas reporting space. And now the SEC is taking steps to start standardizing that and requiring that. Is when it's only voluntary. You have apples, you have oranges. It's really hard to make comparisons. The quality of the data, even with the best of intentions, is not necessarily there. And so I think that it's important to have all of the stakeholders contribute to the development of the standards and on some level how they would be rolled out and ultimately required. But I do think it's important, especially since we know that this is a real near-term opportunity to have a tremendous impact, both in terms of operational efficiency, resilience, and greenhouse gas reduction. I think just leaving it to stakeholders to get together and figure it out is really not where we are. We're at a crisis point, and never waste a good crisis, I guess is the adage, right? I think it's really the time is now, and it really will be up to government to kind of lead the way, convene the stakeholders, and make sure that we're all in lockstep to make this happen.
So we're really talking about a public-private partnership to kind of enable some of these carrots and sticks, as we've been talking about, to bring the industry together. We have a unique opportunity to do that now. I think the Biden administration, especially with the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the work going on at SEC, is uniquely positioned to do that. But what's the desire within the industry? You know, I think we're talking to a group of leaders here who all sort of see the opportunity to be more efficient and also better for the environment, which is fantastic. You rarely get these win-win solutions, but as consumers are demanding their goods and faster, and we have not fulfilled their desires through these supply chain issues that we've discussed in the panel, you know, is the desire there? Is the willingness there among the key industry participants?
I think that while government regulation can act as a forcing function, while it can act as an enabler and maybe even an accelerant, I think that process is going to be relatively slow. I don't know how cohesive it's going to be. I think that as administrations change, a perspective viewpoint is going to ebb and flow, particularly on the subject of sustainability. Unfortunately, it's very kind of political to many folks. I think to this group, it's probably much more pragmatic. Like, it's a thing, we've got to deal with it. I think what the private sector can do is move blindingly fast. Just get to work right now. And I would encourage anybody who's watching this, thinking about starting something, thinking about joining something. It's very much, you know, Nike. Just do it. Like, jump in and start to create impact. There are a lot of solutions out there whereby I think what we can look to do is align incentives. Again, I really do fundamentally believe people want to do the right thing. We have to reduce friction. We have to make it easier for them. We have to give them higher quality. If you create a product or a solution for the consumer, kind of lowercase c or capital C, and you say, look, I'm going to improve quality, reduce cost, increase speed, they're going to say yes. You know, it's entirely possible, if not likely, that as government regulation comes down over the coming years, and let's face it, decades, to solidify that. But the reality is, if the private sector is sprinting, you're only going to be that much better off. Because first of all, you're building a business now, and it's something we shouldn't be shy about, creating enterprise value. Let's create enterprise value right now for our shareholders, and at the same time, create fantastic sustainable outcomes. So to the degree that regulation does come down, to a certain degree, the deck's been sorted. You know, you've got people that are just going to be way out front, that are going to have been doing this for some long period of time. They're going to be very good at it. They're going to be innovating. They're going to be helping to create and shape the infrastructure, the requirements, the data transparency, the collaboration. I shudder at the thought of anybody sitting around and waiting for any entity or agency to come along and say, okay, we've decided that this is the right way to do it and it's time to implement. I think that we really do have everything that we need in order to get to work and create significant steps from a sustainability perspective. We really can do this now. We strike partnerships all the time with various other software entities. Who's got the data that we need? Who's got the connectivity that we need? Who are the partners out there? You know, who are the enterprise shippers and manufacturers? Who are the carriers? I think there's actually a lot of hunger and appetite for this. It's fragmented. It's a massive space. But the good news about really big things are that if we take small bites out of them, they're meaningful.
We actually have a win-win solution where, you know, the government's involved in ensuring sustainability for all of us. The industry is involved in making itself more efficient and also more sustainable. So how does government spark that kind of collaboration we need to get to these opportunities?
Yeah, I think it's really coming down to how do we align the incentives. So we're talking about the economic incentives that Oren is talking about, the environmental and sustainability incentives that a lot of our communities really want to see, and just the kind of customer benefits that are going to come from additional data, faster moving freight, and better visibility. And so where can we bring all of these stakeholders together to provide government with a full picture of where we want to be? I think government is in a position today where they want to be helpful and they want to help align these goals, but they're kind of clueless on the direction to go, or they've got 15 different opportunities and ideas without a real consensus from industry. And they're hearing something from rail, they're hearing something from truckers, they're hearing something entirely different from maritime shippers. And so how do we look at this from a holistic freight perspective, and bring all those people to the table with a goal of developing a solution that serves the environment, serves the economy, and just serves customer benefit? And so bringing all of those things together is going to be the biggest challenge. And that really does come down to industry working together and kind of putting down the pen and worrying about the big picture, which is going to be a real challenge. And so where can we find those incentives from government to support all of that?
I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen here because, many of Oren and David's customers are pretty sophisticated customers, and they're interested in the cost savings and the speed and the data potentially for their greenhouse gas reporting, but there's still a lot of opacity in the system upstream of that on-road portion of the supply chain. And so I think a lot of it really is about shining a light on this black box, because these shippers, the beneficial cargo owners, are not necessarily the ones booking space on the vessels. And so I think that there's a lot of education that needs to happen for people to really start getting better visibility into their data and where the goods are or at any particular moment in time. But if, this is sort of the call to action moment, I think, which is if we can't get this right, where it does make business sense and it is in everyone's economic best interest, then, it will be really hard when we have to make all of the massive capital investments on decarbonizing a lot of this stuff. So the vessels and the equipment and the trucks, in some cases, there is a total cost of ownership story to that. But when it comes to a lot of the fueling infrastructure, there is not. It really will be the cost of the transition. And, if we have the long view, it will have economic benefits, but in the near term, it will require a lot of investment, which the US federal government, thankfully, and you're seeing also in Europe, some of, government is stepping up to the plate and ready to start to make those investments and enable the private sector to make those investments. But, that's something that Remo is really leaning into, is this education of all of the stakeholders and the advocacy for that transparency, so that we could better enable people to come to the table with more symmetrical information.
Fantastic. And I do think we're getting to some interesting solutions that could have some impact over time. I recall from, again, my previous experience that most of the time when action happened, it was because a big brand like Apple or others were being criticized for some of the behaviors in the supply chain. Are there similar sort of a kind of an 80-20 situation in the freight industry where particular players in that industry could step forward as leaders and help bring the rest of the supply chain or the full global supply chain along with them? Is that a way forward here?
I think that so much of what goes on in transportation and supply chain is really demand driven. That supply tends to design itself as a capability or solution based upon what demand needs. So again, I think there's and the good news is the demand tends to be well-known brands. Apple, right? Apple is demand. They're a shipper. They need a lot of things shipped. To the degree that Apple, whether it's externally driven regulation, internally driven, their own ESG goals or initiatives, or let's face it, part of their brand. Apple says this is who we are. This is the brand we want to project to the world. They can absolutely drive compliance within their partners, and we see that often from our large enterprise customers. They've got sustainability initiatives, they've got ESG initiatives they're working on, and those cascade down through their partners and through the supply chain. And for those of us that are not only able to be compliant, but share those values and can align themselves. But again, I really can't stress this enough. This is the key, to do so in a high quality, low cost, frictionless way. I don't think the answer is to say, well, I've achieved, we're a certified B Corp. That's a significant, the only, freight company, to my knowledge, in the world that's a B Corp. The reason we've been able to achieve that is through our technology solution to, making sure trucks are full all the time and reducing greenhouse gas. But it's not enough to walk in and kind of say, hey, we're a B Corp, we're a really big deal, give us the business, right? I mean, you got to walk in there, and that gets you the conversation. You make the most of it by saying, by the way, we're going to offer you much higher quality than you can get from anybody else, because we're going to make sure that it's a hubless experience. It's never going to come off the truck. It's not going to be loaded and unloaded. It's going to get there much faster in a rideshare environment than it would to move through 7 terminals, 7 trucks, 7 drivers. And at the same time, we're gonna save you money, because you're only going to pay for the portion of the truck that you use. Firms like Apple and others are able to drive those initiatives up and down. And I can tell you also from experience, it comes often from unexpected sources. I don't know it's appropriate to name brands and logos, but I'm often really surprised that firms that may not wear it on their sleeve, and I don't know why this is the case, but they may not wear it on their sleeve, but they are thinking about this, whether they're getting ready to be more public and vocal about this, or the workforce and culture is changing, is more top of mind. But the reality is, it's coming from small, medium, and large. It isn't just the enterprise customers. Again, if you've got a higher quality, lower cost solution, people are going to want to do that. But it's again about being honest and really coming to market with something that's different, something that isn't just the reskinning of the old thing that's got maybe a better logo on.
I think we've had a fantastic conversation. Clearly, there is opportunity as we emerge from the pandemic, the geopolitical challenges that we're all aware of, inflation. I think it's exposed some of these issues in the supply chain, and therefore creating this opportunity. And I think today we've discussed some of the key leverage points where we can actually exercise that opportunity for economic and environmental benefits, which is super exciting. So I see this bright future, and I see all this energy and passion to really get that future. So I'm excited about that. What I'd like to do as we wrap up is just ask each panelist for 1 or 2 things that they think will really get us to that low carbon supply chain that we're really all interested in. So I'm going to kind of go around this way on my screen and start with you, Allison, and then Christine, David, and Oren.
I think we've got 2 opportunities for the freight industry to meet the moment. And one is the global supply chain crisis. And then the second is this need to drive sustainability. And so where we can kind of get everyone aligned on these goals and bring them both together for economic purposes and for sustainability purposes, we've got a ton of opportunity, and stakeholders are interested. And more importantly, government is interested in trying to find opportunities to drive this change. And so where we can work together, I think we can really achieve some really big things in the next couple of months and years. And we shouldn't miss this moment. We should really make sure that we're leveraging it to the maximum extent we can.
Thank you. Christine?
Yeah, I agree with Allison. I think another really important point, and I believe Oren touched on this earlier, is it's Climate Week. We're here to talk about sustainability and climate change mitigation, but this is also good business. It's bringing the freight sector into the 21st century, which many people might not realize. It has not shown up at the party yet. But then also it really is about resilience and improving our supply chain and making sure that we can withstand a lot of the shocks that we're seeing now, which frankly might start to become more frequent, whether it's disease related or geopolitical events or more extreme weather events, where you'll see, the supply chain disrupted. I think that it's really important for us to work together now, and this is not a partisan issue. This really is something that people everywhere are paying a huge cost for these inefficiencies, and it is likely to get worse. So we, call to action. We all need to work together and work with that speed that Oren mentioned earlier.
Thank you. David,
Yeah.
going to you.
Yeah, for millennia, people have been trying to fill trucks fuller. And you know, we got to the 80s where we had EDI in the freight industry where we can exchange messages in a quote standard, although none of it's really standard. Now we've got 50 years later or 40 years later, we're able to have new technology. But there's still a challenge that it's very fragmented industry. You know, I don't know if it's 70 or 80% of owner operators are less than 20 trucks. And so, you know, how do you build technology hubs? And that could be Uber Freight, Convoy, Flexport, Flex, all of these technology industry who are smart technologists, you know, either who started at Amazon or otherwise, who are out there building the ability to, I mentioned all those folks who are suppliers, but then also the cloud companies. You know, I know Microsoft is trying to build common data frameworks, and there's really, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. So anywhere you have centralization of data and technology will give you an opportunity to overcome that fragmented market. So I think that's encouraging.
Thank you. Oren, you get the last word.
Yeah, thank you. I actually see the fragmentation as a real benefit. It's a tricky thing, and I don't know that the goal is necessarily to roll up that fragmentation as much as it's to be able to access it. To be able to create a platform whereby, we've had a lot of success doing this where, again, if you really are confident in your differentiation and the value that you're able to bring all the key stakeholders, you can bring that audience to you. And I'm, again, not suggesting any of this is easy, just suggesting that if we don't just keep repackaging the same thing over and over again and calling it the flavor of the month, rather instead, let's drive real value. Let's help shippers save money and improve quality. Let's help carriers make more money. Let's do so in a way that's more sustainable. You can start to rewrite the rules of the game. I do think that the access to data, is really, really important. We're facing it every day, and again, not going to suggest that it's easy, but capturing that data in some cases, there's been a bit of, I guess I would say if the perception is there's only one way to do something, then people behave in that way. And then when you introduce an alternative, sometimes people are scratching their heads and saying, well, this seems obvious and we want to behave that way. But there's just some basic systems that haven't been built. So we're working with a lot of partners who are also willing to innovate, who see economic opportunity in leading, in being a first-in-class provider, to be able to capture data and to be able to share that data and contextualize that data. It's going to take a lot of different people to make this thing work. I would set an expectation that this is a very it's a massive industry that I don't think the fragmentation is a negative thing. I actually think it's a fantastic component that adds to quality and competitive pricing. I think the key is simply how do we maintain fragmentation, because I don't think we want to see the entire global supply chain rolled up under one banner. I don't know that would actually lead to a great outcome, but rather how do we create an environment whereby this tremendous fragmentation can begin to communicate with one another. We're there from a technological perspective. I think it's really now about changing behavior and getting those incentives right.
What a fabulous discussion. I've learned so much from all four of our panelists today. I didn't know very much about the freight industry when we started, but it really does sound like there's massive opportunities, and that the vulnerabilities that we saw during the pandemic have been exposed, and now those opportunities, there's a real chance to solve them. This is an industry ripe for disruption. It sounds like the technology is there, the cost savings are there, the environmental improvements are there, and it's really just about bringing people together so we can achieve all of those benefits for our low carbon future. So I want to thank all our panelists today. You guys did an amazing job. Again, if I learned something, I think our audience also learned something, and hopefully we'll go forward and achieve that fantastic future that you've all laid out. Thank you again for a terrific panel.
Welcome back, everyone. My name is Christina Wyatt, and I'm Deputy General Counsel at Persefoni. I'm going to be filling in for Tim Mohin for this Q&A portion of our program. I am here with our panelists, and I want to thank them again for the incredible discussion that we just heard. I also learned quite a lot and am really inspired by the work in the freight industry. So specifically would like to thank Oren Zaslansky, the founder and CEO of Flock Freight, as well as Allison, Cullin, Senior Vice President at Boundary Stone Partners, Dave Glick, the Chief Technology Officer at Flexe, and Christine Weydig, the Executive Director of the Coalition for Reimagined Mobility. And I would encourage anyone in the audience who has questions that you'd like to pose to this amazing panel to submit them. We do have one question that's just come in, which I will pose to the panel, but please do feel free to submit any additional questions while we go. This first question is, considering the freight space hasn't made any transformative change in the 1950s, what are some long-term infrastructure investments that can support shared truck loading? Oren, you've been living and breathing freight since you were a kid. What's your perspective on this? And I'd love for our other panelists to add their thoughts as well.
Yeah, thank you. And good morning or good afternoon, everybody. I definitely appreciate the question. I have been living it my entire life. I think the number one thing that is going to be transformative and is beginning to change this industry and the supply chain is the use of and the access of data. Those are really two different things. I think on the access side, the supply chain is enormously fragmented, much more so than I think a lot of people realize. There are millions of different stakeholders and entities involved in the global supply chain. Each of them have their own systems. They capture data in their own way. Being able to access that data is something that is really just now coming online across that fragmentation. The second component to that would be how we contextualize that data, how we use that data, with the application of modern machine learning tools and AI and data science, the ability to take that information and garner and glean insights from that, to be able to kind of pluck the signal out of the noise, so to speak, the ability to understand where are the inefficiencies, where are we being suboptimal as an industry. Something we spend a lot of time thinking about is the empty space in the trucks traveling down the highway. I think that's something that the viewers here can probably imagine. We've all driven next to that big truck on the highway and we wonder, is that thing full? Hope so. Unfortunately, about half the time it isn't. About half the time it's only half full. If we have that data, if we can access that data, if we can then begin to predict where are these half-empty trucks, we should fill them up. If we can fill up those trucks, you can imagine we're going to burn the same amount of diesel fuel to move twice as much cargo. There's a massive opportunity today to create a much, much more sustainable outcome, a sustainable solution from the inside out by using the existing trucks that are already on the highway.
I think that's right. And it's also just the ESG reporting that we see and the demand from both investors and customers to learn more about the environmental impacts of what they're doing. And over time, I think we'll also see government's interest in seeing that reporting and that data really showing the actual environmental impact of transportation.
Yeah, as I said above, I think we now have the technology to start thinking about, how do you minimize miles driven, and then the technology about putting inventory in the right place, which for retailers is close to the end consumer, and for brands maybe close to their distribution centers, close to their manufacturing, or close to the end consumer. And so being able to put that inventory in the right place and stand up those nodes quickly and shut them down if they're not needed, adjust to where customers are, is another piece of technology which will allow us to reduce miles driven.
I think there's also a real opportunity here for technology transfer. So we're talking about trucks and a lot of the distribution of goods landside, but a lot of these same approaches could be used for parts of the freight sector that are further upstream than that. So similar vessels could be optimized for space and making sure that they're fully loaded and routed in a way that reduces fuel consumption and thereby reduces greenhouse gas emissions. But I'm here live from the Global Maritime Forum in Brooklyn, and this morning we were addressed by the UN Secretary for Commerce, the Commission for Trade and Development. And one thing that I'd like to inject into the conversation today is this isn't just a climate crisis. There are now cascading crises that are geopolitical and humanitarian, and it's incumbent on all of us that are working on these issues to eliminate inefficiencies in the system that are causing higher costs, not only to consumers in all of the goods that we purchase, but in terms of lesser developed nations, it's really about food security and availability. And so I think that everything that we're talking about here should have that greater sense of urgency. It's Climate Week, we're talking about the climate, but looking at inefficiencies across the system is really critical right now.
Great. Well, thank you all so much. We actually have another question that's come in. And I think that this can apply to all of you. So if you all want to chime in, or any of you who want to chime in, and that is, what were some of the challenges that you faced during the pandemic, where there was a large increase in e-commerce demand? Of course, everybody was ordering everything off of Amazon, among other places. And how did that affect your sustainability efforts, or sustainability efforts in the transport industry generally?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in here on this one. It was extremely challenging during the last 2 years, and I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. You would walk into your local grocery store, and we saw, in this country, shelves bare for the first time ever. Not just maybe for some of the more wants, but quite frankly for some of the needs. We saw what we call bullwhipping, a world in which supply and demand, the customers' need, the consumers' need, and supply, the truck, the train, the ship, the aircraft, weren't in the same place at the same time. The supply chain has kind of operated the way that it has for a long time, regardless of whether or not it's been suboptimal. I think many of us here on the line would say that it has been. It was operating that way, and there were a set of norms and expectations around the way that it operates. When everything got very sort of discombobulated over the last couple of years, you quite frankly, and many times, just couldn't find a truck, or the truck was in the wrong place at the wrong time in order to move those goods. The way in which we've been addressing it at Flock was to say, once again, that maybe we can find a truck, odds are we can, we've got to fill it up. It's just absolutely essential that we make the most of the assets we have. The alternative is certainly not to put many, many more trucks on the road. Everything from traffic congestion to increased capital costs to, of course, much, much more carbon being consumed. Our point of view is, let's use every bit of available supply we have. And we have that point of view all the time. You could imagine during a supply and demand imbalance, we really wanted to make sure that if, to the degree that we found that truck, it was available to us, we had to fill it up. Oftentimes the customer, the manufacturer, the shipper didn't have enough goods to fill that truck up, but things were so delayed, of such dire urgency to get the canonical toilet paper on the store shelves. Flock would match that customer up with 2 or 3 other customers to make sure that it was full without delaying the goods getting to the site in time. I think something that's just really, really important when we think about sustainability is ease of use and increased profitability. We need to be able to, I think table stakes is sustainability. We have to bring solutions to the table that are going to create more sustainable outcomes. And at the same time, we need to be realistic about how we're going to do that. All of us, we need to be easy to do business with, and we need to improve our customer and our stakeholder profitability. People will do the right thing, particularly when you make it frictionless and profitable for them to do so.
I think we with the backups at Long Beach and the variability in lead times, we're seeing many brands going from sort of just-in-time inventory to just-in-case inventory, and I think that can be good because you've built scale, both moving manufacturing back to the U.S. but also storing more inventory in the U.S. When you have scale, that allows you to do more optimization. If you have to spend 6 to 12 weeks getting something from China to put it in a truck, you're going to have a ton of variability, especially with the port backups. As people are adjusting to those longer vendor lead times or holding more inventory in the US, which allows us to do a lot more optimization. Where do we put that inventory, and how do we ship it around? And so I think that's a sort of a silver lining in the supply chain crisis we've been having.
Yeah, it seems like the supply chain crisis revealed two things. One, that we need a more resilient supply chain, and then second, the sustainability issues that we have. But luckily, the solution to both of them seems to be the same, and it's using better data and optimizing what we're working with today. And so it's that dual crisis that's coming together that gives us a lot of opportunity.
I guess the only thing I would add is, again, this does make business sense, and in some ways, whoever's first to embrace open data exchange and digitalization and standardization is going to benefit the most. And so I think that just from a competitiveness standpoint, we all really need to be leaning into this. This is a way to speed the transition to the low carbon economy, but it also is about resilience within our supply chain, but also the competitiveness of global trade.
By all of you, thank you. Maybe one last question. As you think ahead to 2030, what are some of the principal challenges as well as goals and opportunities that you would project?
Can you repeat that? I think it was directed towards me. Is that right?
Yes, thank you.
Could you repeat the question? It was hard to hear. Sorry.
So sorry. I have a little background noise. The question, can you hear me? Great.
Yes.
The question is really just, as you look in your crystal balls to 2030, what are the main challenges and goals or opportunities that you see?
And that's intended for each of the panelists?
Yeah, I would invite each of you to jump in on that, or any of you who would like to.
I can start. I think policymakers are setting really ambitious goals, and they're really trying to move towards sustainable operations and transportation broadly across the globe. Europe, the United States, Asia, we're seeing it everywhere. Finding the technology and putting it into practice is going to be one of the biggest challenges. It's going to be tremendously expensive, and stakeholders need to be aligned on these general goals. And we see a lot of big business that's interested in investing here, but the number of stakeholders is incredibly vast, and bringing everyone to the table is going to be a real challenge. Getting an owner-operator in Kansas to buy an electric truck is going to be a hard sell for quite a while. So we want to find a number of different incentives that can bring these people to the table, and make sure that it's economically viable for everyone.
I mean, there are three pillars to this sustainable future. You've got renewable energy, sort of solar and wind. You have to have batteries to store that energy because the sun doesn't shine all the time and the wind doesn't blow all the time. And then you need to have electric transport to use that electricity that's generated. And we're going to need a massive amount, terawatt hours of battery storage. And the IRA has huge subsidy for batteries. I think it's $45 per kilowatt hour. Tesla is bringing electric cars along with GM, Ford, Kia, and so on and so on. Electric trucks are just a matter of time. We're starting to see them come out. Tesla has a semi. I think Amazon's buying electric trucks for the middle mile, and even better, they're starting to work on autonomous trucking, and that's probably something they'll get here before autonomous driving, because it's all primarily highway miles. And so I think taking autonomous driving, which is should be optimized to save fuel, powered by electricity created from solar and wind, is the secret to where we're going to be in 2030.
I would add, I think that change behavior across up and down our society and our community is going to be a significant opportunity. I think that we've discussed data and the need to share data and to be able to contextualize that data. We need access to that data. We need to think about it openly and not be so closed. We need to think about changing the way in which we consume, changing the way in which we procure. For a large enterprise class customer to say, my data is incredibly valuable, not just within my own business in a proprietary sense, but my data is really valuable to share with a partner. If I can share that data with a partner, they can bring a much more sustainable solution. We're going to have to think about it as an industry, supply chain industry, and making sure that we're sharing data with one another, we're integrating with one another, we're much more efficient. I think efficiency has been used in the past in the context of profits, and I for one don't know that we should shy away from that. I think it's more of an and. I don't think any longer the future, a successful, bright future lies in the or, profits or sustainability. I think clearly it needs to lie in the and. We need to find ways to build very profitable firms that are financially sustainable and environmentally sustainable.
I guess one thing I would add to what my fellow panelists have already said is again, widening the aperture to a bigger picture of the freight sector, not just the on-road goods movement. It is really about system optimization, and having that data shared from the beginning of a journey all the way to the end of a journey, regardless of mode, is really critical. But that insight that the data provides is also really important to sound policymaking. So it really is about evidence-based policymaking, and so to start making policy in a vacuum without really having an understanding of fuel utilization or dwell times or any of that data that we really could gain from open standards and sharing, I think would be less effective.
Thank you all. I'm actually enormously optimistic about the future, having listened to you. There's obviously huge opportunity here, and you all have great thoughts as to how we can leverage those opportunities. So I want to thank the panelists. The panel was recorded and will be available on Flock Freight's website. And specifically, I'd like to thank Oren Zaslansky, Allison, Cullin, Dave Glick, and Christine Weydig for the really great discussion and for sharing your very significant expertise. So thank you very much. And thank you to everyone who's joined and listened in on this.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks so much for listening.
Thanks.